So, about 30 years ago, when I was living in Singapore and teaching at Amitabha Buddhist Center, there was a incident that happened that was rather disturbing. Um, there was a man who was kind of loosely affiliated with the center. He didn't really come to activities so much, but when we were trying to raise funds to build a new temple, he got involved to help with the fundraising. I wasn't too happy about his behavior. He had a lot of anger. He blew up. And some of the advice that he gave, I felt was really off the wall. And, but I noticed that some of the other committee members, the people involved in the center, were paying attention to him. And I felt that they were being influenced by some of the things he was saying, and I was concerned about that. So one day at a committee meeting, when he wasn't there, I said something about him, not to insult him or criticize him, but just as a warning, like be careful. But one of the committee members, who was a friend of this guy, told him what I said. And then he blew up. He was so angry at me, not to my face, but behind my back. Because I actually tried to reach out to make peace with him, but he just didn't want to communicate at all. And I heard that he was saying, negative things about me. One of which was, he said that everything I did was self-cherishing. Everything I did was out of self-cherishing attitude. And that was disturbing to me. Although I realized I didn't have to take it too seriously, because he wasn't exactly a Buddha himself or a bodhisattva or someone with high realizations, to my way of thinking anyway. But it did bother me. And one of my teachers once said that anytime we are criticized, there's really no reason to get upset about it. What we should do is investigate if what is being said is true or not. And if it's not true, then we can just ignore it. It's like nonsense, so why get upset about it? But on the other hand, if it is true, if we check ourselves and realize, yes, it's true what that person said, then we can take it as constructive criticism, because we do want to work on ourselves, improve ourselves to follow the path. So I tried doing that, and it was a little hard, because I thought, but I'm doing so much to help others. I was teaching several times a week at the center and helping in other areas of the center, and I was also teaching outside. I was getting invitations to teach here and there, and people were coming to talk to me, to tell me about their problems and ask for advice. So I was incredibly busy doing things for others. But I also wasn't completely naive and thinking that, just because you're doing things for others doesn't mean you're free of self-cherishing. So I was trying to look at my reasons and my motivation behind what I was doing. And I could recognize that, I was getting some satisfaction out of what I was doing. I mean, it's really wonderful when you teach and you have all these people looking at you so attentively and with such interest and sometimes even incredible devotion, bowing to you, coming up afterwards and saying, "Oh, thank you so much, Venerable. That was so helpful for me. You are such a good teacher," and things like that. So, I mean, it's kind of hard not to get some personal satisfaction from that. So I didn't kid myself in thinking I was totally free of self-cherishing mind. But on the other hand, did I do everything exclusively for self-cherishing? And that was a bit hard to tell. And also it was around that time that I had become aware of a long-term habit of self-hatred and self-criticism. That inner voice that's always pointing out your own faults and beating yourself up and so on. So I think that had been in my mind, as long as I can remember, probably since I was a child. But it took me a long time to recognize it. It's so much part of my mind that I didn't even notice it. and some of the traditional teachings in the Tibetan tradition can make it sound like it's okay to beat yourself up. You should beat yourself up, especially when they talk about the self-cherishing attitude. There's things that say like, abandon yourself and completely dedicate yourself to others. Almost like you were a bad person and you should just totally forget yourself and help others. So it can, if you don't understand those statements correctly, it can feed that tendency towards self-criticism and self-hatred. And so I was starting to realize that had happened. And so I was trying to work on that, trying to be kind to myself and have compassion for myself and stop this old voice of self-criticism. So yeah, I was still trying to tease apart those two things, overcoming self-cherishing and self-hatred and self-criticism. That was still not completely clear to me. So anyway, that's something that happened in the past, but it's still in the back of my mind what that man said about me. I was thinking about it recently, and I think that I'm in a better position now to be able to look at that more carefully, more realistically, not be so upset by what he said, but assess it realistically. And I also feel that being here, being in this situation is really helpful for that because this community has the kind of culture of self-reflection and honesty and transparency, and especially about this issue of the self-cherishing mind, because Venerable talks about it so much in her teachings and her books and so on. And then within the community, people are quite open about what's going on inside, not trying to hide, the reality of their afflictions, but talking about them, including in the BBCs. So I find that being here helps me to look at my own mind more honestly and identify, not so good attitudes and admit them sometimes when that's appropriate, or at least work on them, at least acknowledge them to myself. So just to give a couple examples, last week or so, there was an unhappy cow down the road, and I don't know if anyone else heard it, but maybe because I'm living further down, I could hear it very clearly. So it would in the evenings, for several days in a row, there would be this very loud mooing sound, and I'm very sensitive to noise. I notice noise that some people don't notice at all, but I notice it, and I can easily get irritated. And so I was, finding myself feeling irritated by this loud noise because I love silence. And so the usual process is, there's a sound or whatever object it is, and then there's a feeling, in this case, an unhappy feeling, unpleasant feeling, and then that can quickly lead to aversion and other kinds of mental activities like, oh, why does she have to make so much noise? Why can't that stop? And why do I have to put up with this? And so I noticed that happening and then stepped back from it and said, what's going on here? And quickly I could see it was self-cherishing mind. I don't want to have to listen to that noisy cow. And then I thought, well, why is she making that noise? And I thought it could be a mother who has had her baby taken away, because I was once visiting a center, and this center was right next to a big dairy farm, and it was around the time of year when that was happening. The babies maybe they'd been with their mother for a few days or a few weeks, and then they were taken away so that the milk could go to people. And the cows were just mooing all day, all night. Yeah, the sound of that. It was disturbing, but when I was told what was going on, it just broke my heart. And I just felt, oh my God, how sad, how awful, how tragic. So that could be the cause of that cow. Because I think when cows are happy, when they're contented, they don't make noise. They're just, eating grass or lying in the grass, enjoying themselves. So I think that kind of noise is because of unhappiness. Or maybe it was a new cow had just been moved to this area from wherever she was before and was, having trouble adjusting and complaining that she wasn't asked about making this move. So anyway, thinking about the animal and what was possibly going on with it and realizing there was suffering, helped me to move away from being self-centered and more compassionate. But yeah, it just helped me because I've had so many cases of that through my life, especially my ordained life, especially when I'm in retreat, trying to meditate and wanting peace and quiet. And there's somebody making noise, I can get quite negative about that. So recognizing the role of self-cherishing was very helpful. And then another incident that happens here is going through the food line and having to walk past 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 dishes that I can't eat because they contain things that, I don't digest very well. I mean, I could eat them, but then I'd suffer afterwards, so it's better not to eat them. And so I can notice in my mind sometimes, not always, but sometimes this poor me, I can't eat this delicious looking food and everybody else can. And why don't they think of me? And then another thing that happens is when I finally get to a dish that I can eat, then I think I take more than I probably should, more than my fair share. Because in my mind I'm thinking, well, they can eat all that other food, which I can't eat, so I should have more of this. So justifying that. So I've noticed that, and I'm trying to stop that from happening because it doesn't seem right, doesn't seem fair. And again, it's self-cherishing mind. So those are just a few cases of noticing the self-cherishing attitude. And probably, if I'm really 100% honest, I think that man was right. That I do. There's self-cherishing mind in everything that I do. But that's kind of normal because it takes a long time to be free of self-cherishing. You have to be a pretty high level of the bodhisattva path before that's out of your mind. But that doesn't mean it's 100% self-cherishing. I mean, I think we have to at least try to have altruism and, do the things we do without self-cherishing. But to be totally free of it is just not realistic. So now I can feel thankful to that man. It took a while. But thankful for, getting me to reflect on something important. And I also thank this community, this situation, for having that kind of culture of transparency and openness, and also humor. Being able to laugh at yourself for these issues and these things that we get ourselves into, rather than taking ourselves too seriously. And also just a reminder that whenever we do notice faults like self-cherishing or any kind of affliction in our mind, that we need to be kind to ourselves and compassionate to ourselves. I'm saying this to myself because I still need to work on that, but I think anyone else who's listening and has an issue with that, that's really, really important. The point is not to beat yourself up and hate yourself and think you're horrible, but just to recognize there are these attitudes in our mind that are counterproductive for our own happiness. They're not good for us, they're not good for others, and especially if we want to follow the path, we need to recognize them and then work on overcoming them. And that's definitely possible, but we need to do it within an attitude of kindness, compassion, patience, and humor, not taking ourselves too seriously.